Hi, I'm Deborah Dahab. I'm an intercultural psychologist and an expat and cultural transition coach. And my mission and goal is to help you, expat, go through your cultural transition process in a smooth and easy way. Today, we're going to talk about cultural shock. We're going to talk about a little bit of how it goes, where it came from, this term, and gives you some ideas on how to cope. Please subscribe if you like this content, and you will get notified every time I post new videos. Okay, let's get to it. Cultural shock. Wow, this term has been thrown around like crazy, right? Anytime there's something that you don't really understand, it's cultural shock. And well, that's partly true, to be honest. Cultural shock, I like to give an example, and you don't even have to be a foreigner, an expat, to live cultural shocks or to feel it. So you know how in the same country, sometimes different cities have different ways of greeting. This happens in Brazil, where I was born, and in Sao Paulo, for example, you greet people with like a little kiss and a kind of like a mini hug. And in Rio and in other cities, it's with two kisses on the cheek, right? So if you're from Sao Paulo or have been living in Sao Paulo and you go to these places, you will most likely feel the difference because people will expect you to give the other kiss on the cheek, and you're not expecting that. So one of you is going to be left hanging there expecting the other kiss, and that causes some kind of awkwardness, right? Some cultures are more physical in their greetings, like for example, this example I gave, and other cultures are are a lot more distant physically in greeting. So people might, shake your hand or even, greet from literally a distance and no touching involved. And this greeting process is, for me, the first sign of cultural shock, because cultural shock is what it means. It's that anxiety that happens, that is precipitated, that happens when you lose signs of familiar social interaction. And what is more evident of social interaction than the greeting, right? So you don't even have to be an expat or a foreigner to have lived and felt cultural shock. So that's one thing I like to talk about. So people kind of demystify the whole thing. It's not like it's a thing that we all go through normally if you're interacting with people of different cities and cultures, but it doesn't have to be that big a deal. It's like, oh, I'm experiencing cultural shock. Yeah, it can be hard, but most of us have lived that in some way or form before. So basically, cultural shock is that feeling that you get, and some of the symptoms that that is talked about and that I felt, and many of my clients have felt, probably all of them, is that feeling of not being able to communicate, not being understood in the way you talk and the way you speak. This is especially relevant if you actually don't speak the language, right? It can also be relevant if you do speak the language, like the case of Brazilians in Portugal or other, Latin Americans in Spain, or Spain in Latin America, or some English-speaking countries, is that you will speak the language, you will have most likely the proper grammar, but many terms and ways of treating people will be completely different. So you will feel that, you might even feel that stronger because you might not expect that as much as if you're going into a culture that you absolutely don't know the language. You kind of expect you're not going to be able to communicate properly, right? So this lack of of feeling understood and feeling that you can communicate, that's one of the key things regarding cultural shock. The other thing is homesickness, right? You start to get really homesick, and from my experience, my own experience, and with my clients, you also start to idealize back home, right? You know, like, oh, back home everything was so much better because blah blah blah. And it's a time where you can really lose track, if you're not careful, of the reasons why you made the move in the first place, right? Because you can get pulled back in a way that if you're not careful and if you don't have an adequate mindset or some external help from a coach or a therapist or a friend or a friend that has been through that, you can really get lost in the past and get sucked back to your home country in your rose-colored glasses, so to speak. Another thing that is really typical of this phase is that you get the fear of being robbed or cheated or taken advantage of. So I heard this story that was really interesting. I was doing a workshop. I do some workshops, and one of the participants really identified with this so-called symptom of cultural shock and said, you know what? I do feel that. You know, every time I go to the bakery, I have this thing in my mind that I think they're giving me, pastries from yesterday. They're not giving me fresh pastries because, I don't know, I think they do that because I won't understand or it won't make the difference. And that's exactly it. So it can be, being fear of physically robbed of, taking your possessions, but it also can be the fear of being taken advantage of because you just don't know how, the social rules and the things work. So you might feel that people are not being straight with you or honest with you. And that example was really interesting because it was something that she felt and she really didn't kind of process it as a symptom of cultural shock. So that's an example that might not be so evident and is a symptom of, you're feeling like you're the outsider. You're not, people don't get you, you don't get people, etc. And one other symptom of cultural shock is referred to anger. Now, anger for minor frustrations. So, every time we're outside of our country, or our culture or our comfort zone, we're going to go through minor decisions, even, go to the supermarket. That's an example I like to give, making decisions on products we're going to buy. And, you might not find what you're looking for, or, even if you're sick or you need some sort of medicine, and that can build up to be anger. And it's actually, when you look at it, it's really not that big a deal. But it builds up and you can have fits of anger over minor frustrations, over things that, you wouldn't give a second thought in your comfort zone, in your own culture. So these are the typical symptoms of cultural shock. Just check internally if you've felt any of them. And one way of dealing with this is, well, knowing that it's a phase and it will pass. And I will talk more about the phases. There are more of them in another video. But know that cultural shock is kind of a normal process, and even expected, because you are in a different place. You are a foreigner. You are from somewhere else. And it's expected. And one other thing that I would, another tip that I would like to give people, and I do give to my clients, is that look at things in a broad way, in a more open way, and try not to take things personally. What happens is that we tend in this phase to compare a lot, right? And this is different, that is different, and it can be hard to not take it personally. So people might seem rude, for example, or I don't know, aggressive or not helpful, but in all likelihood, it's probably not towards you specifically. It's just that your frame of reference, where you come from, literally and figuratively, is different from where other people come from, literally and figuratively. So when these two situations have sometimes a clash, we tend sometimes to take it personally. Oh, they don't like me. They don't smile at me, and most likely that's not the case. You know, that's just the way the culture operates. So those would be my my suggestions, and I hope you like this video. Subscribe, and see you next time. Bye bye.